Hello, Booktube. I'm Peg, the book prize addict. Welcome to day one of my series of parasiting Steve Donoghue's prize list, not prize list, best of the year list. And although I usually follow prize lists, I think these lists are better than any of the prize lists. I learned to wait for them every year now since I've been here 2 years, and his have been coming out this month regularly. And I explained down in my notes what I'm doing here while I'm calling it parasiting, and I will be going through as many as I can on the list. He hasn't put out his list for today yet. I think it's either going to be worst nonfiction or best fiction. From what I can tell, he has three more left. He did worst fiction yesterday is good. You'll be hearing more about that in a minute. But while we're on the subject of Steve, you must watch his haul video from yesterday. It ends with something like a Giganticus finale, but in it he announces that he's going to get into poetry next year. You know, he kind of hasn't always been real adulatory about poetry, and so he announces that he might even have a best poetry list on his list next year. I guess that means I'll have to read some of them too if I'm going to keep doing this. But he gets a what he calls slim volume of poetry in the mail that he opens up, and he announces, I'm going to really start trying to understand and analyze poetry. So he begins to analyze the first poem in this book, and it's hilarious. You want to say, don't take it so true to life, Steve. Metaphor, simile. If there was a more literary Saturday Night Live, his little poetry skit should definitely be on it. So take a look at that. Okay, let's get into the books that he has on his list, many lists. I think there's 13 already out. I've also, of course, linked it at the bottom so you can take them all. But I'm just going to go through them and pick books that come up that have come in on my holds from the library, and no certain order, but just talk about them. And in many cases, they really are a to be read type thing. I haven't read all these 150 books that are going to be on his list, of course, but I enjoy checking them out from the library and looking them over and talking about them. So, okay, the first one I'm going to talk today is from his biography, best biography list. It was number 2 on his list, and it is a huge biography of Thomas Cromwell. Huge. And I am quite interested in this, and would maybe be reading it in the new year, because I have questions in my mind about Thomas Cromwell. Well, the first time, I'm not a real history person, I really ran into him was in Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. And in that one, the story is kind of told from Thomas Cromwell's point of view, and he's a very likable character. And I wondered what all the questions were about. He seemed fine. Then I read somebody to learn a little bit more about Thomas Cromwell. I do better if I read about real life characters in novels. C.J. Sansom has these wonderful Tudor mysteries out, and I read Disillusion, and I'm up to Sovereign, both, of course, having lots of Thomas Cromwell. And in these, he doesn't look so good. It's not told from his point of view, and he's kind of an unlikable character from this point of view. So I thought to myself, who is Thomas Cromwell? Was he good or bad? Well, wouldn't you know, when I started looking through this, Hilary Mantel actually has a blurb on a cover that says, this is a book that, and it's not often you say this, we have been waiting for 400 years. And she goes on to explain, actually, in the blurb, that Thomas Cromwell is portrayed many different ways with her own novel and other novels, and this actually, I guess, shows the complexity of him. He's not good, he's not bad like the rest of us, And I think that would be really interesting if when I get in a long book mode. Okay, next we have Steve's best debut of the year. Number one was Ohio, and I read it last week, and I can't tell you how great it is. Now, first of all, it has to do with my situation and where I was, but Ohio is a book about a novel about a small dying town in Ohio. I guess that's called part of the Rust Belt, and the characters that go to high school together, and some very great characterization. And then they come back after so many years, and what their lives have been. And I read it last week while I was in the Midwest state of Missouri. Very, very like Ohio here anyway. Notice the picture is actually a wet parking lot in a convenience store. That's the big thing in the night in small town Midwest. I was in, and I have to say, while I was there visiting my family that remains in this very small dying town in Missouri, I could just feel the setting here. Of course, I always love setting and atmosphere anyway. One of the things that hit the spot, it talked about when you've grown up in a place or lived there many years ago, you go back as you walk around town. One of the weird things that happen is you come upon a building that's not what it used to be, and you can remember through the years, almost see in your mind's eye, all the different things that building was and all the things that happened there in your life, and that really does take place. So this may be even my number one of the year. I love this book. Okay, so let's get on now. How long is this taking? I'm trying to make these short if I do them every day for sure. Okay, the next one is from his Science and Nature Best Book list, and it's called A Tangled Tree, A Radical New History of Life. Now, I remember when he talked about this, I kind of thought it would be good for me to read it because I know nothing about the biological sciences. And Steve himself says that this author, David Quammen, has the ability to take complex scientific concepts and make them comprehensive to the layperson. Evidently, he's done this with different subjects, written several books like this. And this one deals with horizontal gene transfer. Now, I remember when Steve talked about it, I thought, I might be interested to learn what that is. And I started reading this, and it's really accessible, and I already know what horizontal gene transfer is. I've always wondered. And so this is very good, and I like the fact that I can understand it right away. Okay, now we're getting on to, oh yeah, this is a good one. We all know that Steve is a romance fan, and he put his very favorite romance of the year list on. And here's his number one. I started with number one. I wasn't sure how far I'd get with romance because I've not really ever read romance before, but this is called All Dressed in White. And as I said, it's number one on his romance list. It's, I believe, only put out in paperback. That's the problem with some of the romances, is they're only in paperback, and my library doesn't have them. But I can find them okay. And I have to tell you, it's really kind of good. Now, Steve made the point, and I have to agree, that sometimes you just want to escape in your reading, especially this last year. And I started reading this. It was charmingly done. About in the 1800s in England, a merchant comes to town and needs to have a wife, and we just happen to be in the perspective of a young woman there who needs to find a husband. And it's just, it really, like he says, it's relaxing, it's fun to read, it's got a little bit of spicy sex, but just the right amount. Anyway, so I think I'm going to try some more of his romances this month while I'm going through these. Okay, now, we can't go on without putting his worst books of the year list. He's going to put out a worst nonfiction very soon, but he put out the worst fiction. And, you know, I have to agree with him. Now, if there's some on the list that I don't agree, I'm going to be brave and say, but I have to agree with this one. This was his number 6 worst, which I'm sure you've all heard of, Year of Rest and Relaxation, about a young woman who decides she wants to sleep for a year with the help of drugs and a kindly pharmacist. And Steve calls it the pinnacle of narcissism. This and the main character is a pampered, idiotic millennial. The book decides she wants to be adamantly inert for a year. Now, I kind of thought the same thing. I'm not just parroting off of Steve, but plus the sex in it compared with the romance, this was just icky. Nobody would want to do it if they learned about it from this book. Ugh. Anyway, so that's it for today. I got to go back to the library. I got some more holds, so I'm nearing my 100-book limit with these, but I'm having a lot of fun. So I'll be back tomorrow with more from Steve's List.